There are certain stories that do not begin with beauty or romance, but with a quiet discomfort that lingers in the air. They are not meant to entertain you or offer a comforting escape. Instead, they pull you closer to the parts of society that most people prefer to ignore. This is one of those stories not about love crossing borders or dreams fulfilled, but about how dignity slowly dissolves when everything is measured against money. When you look closely, you begin to realize that what seems distant in history is not as far removed from your life as you might think. In the early 20th century, in a world shaped by colonial pressure and economic desperation, marriage was rarely about connection or affection. It was calculation, pure and cold, the kind that reduces human relationships to numbers and outcomes. A woman was no longer seen as a person with inner depth, but as something with a limited window of value, something to be presented, evaluated, and exchanged. The language of love was replaced by the language of opportunity, and slowly, almost invisibly, people began to accept this shift as normal. What started as survival gradually became a system, and what was once unthinkable became routine. But this is not just a story locked away in history books or preserved in museums. The forms have changed, the packaging has become more polished, but the core dynamic remains. Today, instead of dim streets and hidden arrangements, you see curated profiles and carefully constructed identities on digital platforms. What used to be negotiated in private is now displayed openly dressed up as lifestyle choices, personal branding, or modern independence. The transaction is no longer hidden, but it is also no longer recognized for what it truly is. That is the quiet evolution of the same system, adapting to a new era while preserving its original logic. When money becomes the central measure of value, people begin to reshape themselves around it, not because they are forced to, but because they believe it is the most rational path forward. They learn how to present themselves in ways that attract attention, how to speak, how to behave, how to signal desirability. Every smile, every gesture, every detail becomes intentional, optimized, refined. Over time, it becomes difficult to distinguish between what is real and what is performed, because the performance has been practiced so long that it starts to feel natural. And in that moment, something important is lost, not suddenly, but through a gradual erosion that few people notice until it is already gone. The deeper you look, the more unsettling it becomes. Because this transformation does not only happen on an individual level, it spreads into families, into communities, into the very structures that are supposed to protect and nurture human life. When survival is tied to financial gain, and when financial gain is tied to how well someone can position themselves in this marketplace of desire, even the most sacred relationships begin to shift. Parents start to think in terms of opportunity rather than well-being, and children begin to see themselves not as individuals with inherent worth, but as assets that can be developed, improved, and eventually exchanged. What makes this reality even more complex is how easily it can be justified. People rarely see themselves as participating in something harmful. They frame their choices as practical, responsible, even necessary. They talk about securing a better future, creating stability, taking advantage of opportunities that would otherwise be out of reach. And on the surface, those explanations make sense. But underneath, there is a quiet compromise taking place, one that slowly redefines what it means to have value as a human being. It shifts the focus away from who you are and places it entirely on what you can offer in return. As we move forward, it becomes important to recognize that this is not about judging individuals or condemning choices. It is about understanding the system that shapes those choices and the psychological patterns that keep it alive. Because once you begin to see it clearly, you start to notice how often it appears in everyday life. In the way people present themselves, in the way success is measured, in the way relationships are formed and maintained. It is subtle, often disguised as ambition or progress, but its impact runs deep. And perhaps the most uncomfortable question is not whether this system exists, but how much of it we have already accepted as normal. Because the moment you start assigning a price to your own worth, even in small ways, you are participating in the same logic. You are stepping into a role that has been shaped long before you, one that promises reward but quietly demands something in return. That is where this story begins, not in the past, but in the present, in the choices people make every day, without fully realizing what they are becoming. If you were to step back into that earlier era and observe closely, you would not find a chaotic system built on impulse. What you would see instead is something disturbingly organized, almost mechanical in its precision. Young women, often from rural backgrounds, were brought into environments where they were trained not in the emotional sense of building relationships, but in the technical sense of creating appeal. They were taught how to walk, how to speak, how to present themselves in ways that increased their perceived value. What should have been expressions of personality became rehearsed techniques, carefully adjusted to meet the expectations of those with money. In those spaces, love was no longer a feeling that emerged naturally. It was broken down into components studied and reconstructed as a set of skills. A glance could be practiced, a smile could be timed, even silence could be used strategically. Everything had a purpose, and that purpose was not connection, but conversion. The goal was not to find a partner, but to secure an outcome, to transform attention into financial stability. Over time, the distinction between genuine emotion and calculated behavior became blurred until even the individuals themselves could no longer tell the difference. From a psychological perspective, this shift represents something profound. When you begin to evaluate yourself primarily based on your usefulness to others, you slowly detach from your intrinsic sense of worth. You stop asking who you are and start asking what you can offer. That question, repeated often enough, begins to shape identity in ways that are difficult to reverse. A person becomes less of a living, evolving individual and more of a functional object designed to perform a specific role within a larger system. And once that transformation takes hold, it becomes incredibly difficult to step outside of it. What is even more unsettling is how this mindset extends beyond the individual and into the family structure. In situations where resources are limited and opportunities are scarce, families begin to see potential through a different lens. A daughter is no longer simply a child to be protected, but an investment that can yield returns. Conversations that should revolve around care and guidance quietly shift towards strategy and outcome. Decisions are no longer guided purely by emotional bonds, but by calculations about what might bring the greatest benefit to the household. And yet from the inside, these choices rarely feel like exploitation. They are often framed as sacrifice, as responsibility, as a way to support the family and create a better future. Parents convince themselves that they are acting in the best interest of their children, while children learn to interpret their own discomfort as a necessary step towards success. This is how the system sustains itself, not through force, but through belief. It reshapes perception so effectively that people begin to cooperate with it willingly, even when it costs them something deeply personal. When you translate this dynamic into the modern world, the surface looks very different, but the underlying structure remains surprisingly similar. Today, the training does not happen in hidden rooms, but through social media, online communities, and endless streams of content that teach people how to present themselves. There are guides on how to build the perfect profile, how to curate a lifestyle that attracts attention, how to signal success and desirability. It is framed as empowerment, as self-development, as taking control of your image. But at its core, it is still about increasing exchange value in a marketplace driven by perception. The language has evolved, but the intention has not. What was once called survival is now called branding. What was once hidden is now celebrated. People talk openly about positioning themselves for better opportunities, about leveraging their appearance or personality to gain access to a certain lifestyle. And again, on the surface, it can seem logical, even smart. But the deeper question remains unchanged. At what point does self-improvement turn into self-commodification? And how do you recognize the difference before it is too late? This is where the story begins to move from observation into reflection. Because once you understand the pattern, you start to see how easily it can pull you in. Not through dramatic choices, but through small, consistent adjustments in how you see yourself and how you present your value to the world. And each adjustment, no matter how minor it seems, brings you one step closer to a version of yourself that is shaped more by external demand than by internal truth. That is the quiet tension that runs beneath everything, the space where identity and value begin to separate in ways that are not immediately visible, but deeply consequential over time. The most unsettling part of this transformation is not how it begins, but how easily it becomes invisible. Once a system is accepted, people stop questioning it. They stop noticing the small compromises, the quiet adjustments, the moments where something genuine is replaced by something strategic. Over time, those moments accumulate, and what once felt uncomfortable starts to feel normal. That is how a person can slowly shift from living as themselves to performing a version of themselves without even realizing when the transition happened. In modern life, this often shows up in subtle ways. It might look like carefully crafting an online presence that highlights only the most appealing parts of your life. It might sound like choosing your words not based on what you truly think, but on what will be better received. It might feel like constantly adjusting your behavior to fit what you believe others expect from you. None of these actions seem harmful on their own, but together they create a pattern where external validation becomes the primary guide for internal decisions. And once that pattern is established, it becomes very difficult to break. There is a psychological cost to living this way. When your sense of worth depends on how others perceive you, your identity becomes unstable. It shifts with trends, with opinions, with the unpredictable reactions of the world around you. You may achieve a certain level of success or recognition, but it often comes with a lingering sense of emptiness, a feeling that something essential is missing. That feeling is not random. It is the result of disconnecting from your intrinsic value, from the part of you that exists independently of what you can offer or how you are perceived. What makes this even more complex is how society reinforces this behavior. We live in a culture that often celebrates outcomes without questioning the process. People admire visible success, material, comfort, and rapid progress, but rarely ask what was traded in order to achieve it. The faster someone rises, the more attention they receive, regardless of the path they took. This creates an environment where the pressure to perform, to compete, and to present a certain image becomes almost unavoidable. And in that environment, it is easy to confuse recognition with fulfillment. You can see this clearly in how relationships are formed and maintained today. In many cases, people are no longer just looking for connection. They are evaluating compatibility in terms of lifestyle status and potential benefit. Conversations that should be about understanding and mutual growth become subtle negotiations about value and exchange. Even when there is genuine emotion involved, It is often layered with considerations about what the relationship represents and what it can provide. This does not mean that every relationship is transactional, but it does mean that the influence of this mindset is more widespread than most people are willing to admit. The danger lies in how quietly this perspective reshapes expectations. When enough people begin to think this way, it starts to feel like the only way to navigate the world. You may tell yourself that you are simply being realistic, that you are adapting to the conditions around you. But there is a difference between understanding reality and surrendering to it completely. When you stop questioning the system, you also stop protecting the parts of yourself that do not fit within it. And those parts, the ones that are not easily measured or exchanged, are often the ones that define who you truly are. This is where the story begins to deepen, because it is no longer just about observing a pattern or understanding a system. It becomes about choice. Not a dramatic, life-changing decision, but a series of small, everyday choices about how you see yourself and how you engage with the world. Do you define your worth based on what you can gain, or do you hold on to something that cannot be easily quantified? Do you shape your identity around external expectations, or do you allow space for something more authentic to exist, even if it is less immediately rewarded? And perhaps the most important question is whether you are aware of the trade-offs you are making. Because every system offers something in return for participation. It promises opportunity, stability, recognition, or comfort. But it also requires often something less visible, but equally significant. The challenge is not to reject the world as it is, but to move through it with awareness to understand the forces at play without losing yourself to them. That awareness is what separates those who adapt consciously from those who are shaped unconsciously, and it is where the next part of this story begins. One of the most revealing aspects of this entire pattern is not found in individuals, but in the quiet transformation of the family itself. Traditionally, the family is supposed to be a place of protection, a space where a person can exist without needing to prove their worth. It is where identity is nurtured before it is tested by the outside world. But when financial pressure and social expectations begin to dominate, that role slowly changes. The family no longer functions purely as a refuge, but starts to operate more like a strategic unit, making decisions based on outcomes rather than well-being. This shift does not happen suddenly. It emerges through small conversations, through concerns about stability, through comparisons with others who seem to be doing better. Parents begin to think about what will secure the future, what will elevate the family's position, what will bring in more resources. Children in turn start to internalize those priorities. They learn that their choices are not entirely their own, that their paths are tied to something larger than their personal desires. And while this can be framed as responsibility or sacrifice, it also creates a subtle pressure that reshapes how they see themselves. In some cases, this pressure leads to decisions that prioritize financial gain over emotional truth. Relationships are encouraged, not because they are meaningful, but because they are advantageous. Opportunities are evaluated not by their alignment with personal values, but by their potential return. Over time, this creates a dynamic where people begin to measure their own success by how much they can contribute materially rather than how fulfilled or authentic their lives feel. The language of care remains, but the logic underneath it becomes increasingly transactional. What makes this particularly complex is the way it is justified. Families often believe they are acting out of love, out of a desire to provide better opportunities and reduce hardship. And in many ways, that belief is genuine. But intention does not always align with impact. When a person is consistently encouraged to prioritize external outcomes over internal alignment, they begin to disconnect from their own sense of direction. They may achieve what was expected of them, but still feel a quiet sense of disorientation, as if they are living a life that was designed for someone else. You can see echoes of this dynamic in modern society, especially in environments where success is highly visible and constantly compared. There are still many situations where people feel pushed toward relationships, careers, or lifestyles that do not truly resonate with them. It may not look as explicit as it did in the past, but the underlying mechanism is similar. The desire to meet expectations, to maintain status, to avoid disappointment, all contribute to choices that are shaped more by external pressure than by internal clarity. This is where the emotional cost becomes more apparent. When the family, which should be a source of grounding, becomes another place where value is measured and evaluated, it leaves very little space for a person to simply exist as they are. Every environment begins to reflect the same logic, the same emphasis on performance and outcome. And without a space to reconnect with something more genuine, it becomes easy to lose track of what you actually want, separate from what is expected of you. At a broader level, this reflects a deeper shift in how society defines success. When material achievement becomes the primary indicator of value, everything else starts to revolve around it. Relationships, identity, even personal well-being are filtered through the lens of productivity and gain. It creates a world where people are constantly moving, constantly striving, but not always clear about what they are moving toward. And in that constant motion, the question of meaning often gets pushed aside. The challenge then is not simply to reject these pressures, because they are deeply embedded in the way the world operates. The challenge is to remain aware of them while still holding on to a sense of internal direction. To recognize when a choice is being shaped by fear, expectation, or comparison, and to pause long enough to consider whether it truly aligns with who you are. That pause, that moment of reflection, is where the possibility of a different path begins to emerge, even within a system that seems to offer very few alternatives. As this pattern extends beyond families and into society as a whole, it begins to reshape how value itself is defined. There was a time when dignity was considered something intangible, something that could not be bought or measured. It existed quietly in how a person lived, in the way they treated others, in the integrity of their choices. But when wealth becomes the dominant standard, that invisible quality starts to lose its place. People begin to look for visible proof instead, something they can point to, compare, and quantify. This is where the shift becomes most dangerous. When value is tied to what can be seen and counted, it creates a system where appearance often outweighs substance. A person is judged not by their character, but by the lifestyle they display, the assets they accumulate, the image they project. And because these things are visible, they become easy to imitate. People learn how to create the illusion of success, how to present a version of themselves that fits the expectation, even if it does not reflect their reality. Over time, the line between authenticity and performance becomes almost impossible to distinguish. You can observe this clearly in modern urban environments where status is often communicated through symbols. The car someone drives, the places they visit, the brands they wear, even the way they document their lives online, all become part of a larger narrative about who they are. These signals are not random. They are carefully chosen, consciously or unconsciously, to position a person within a certain social hierarchy. And once that hierarchy is established, it begins to influence how people are treated, what opportunities they receive, and how they see themselves. What makes this system so powerful is that it does not require enforcement. It operates through collective. When enough people agree that certain indicators represent success, those indicators become reality in a practical sense. They shape behavior guide decisions and reinforce the cycle. People begin to chase what is recognized, not necessarily what is meaningful. And in doing so, they contribute to the very system that limits their sense of self. This is also where the concept of identity starts to fracture. When external validation becomes the primary source of worth, the internal sense of self becomes less stable. A person may feel confident when they are receiving recognition, but uncertain when that recognition fades. Their identity becomes dependent on factors they cannot fully control, which creates a constant underlying tension. They are always adjusting, always adapting, always trying to maintain a certain image because that image has become tied to their sense of value. At the same time, society begins to normalize this instability. It becomes acceptable to constantly reinvent yourself, not out of genuine growth, but out of necessity to stay relevant. Trends change, expectations evolve, and people feel pressured to keep up. This creates a cycle where identity is no longer something that develops organically, but something that is managed, curated, and updated like a product. And just like any product, it is subject to comparison, evaluation, and eventual replacement. The result is a culture that appears dynamic and full of opportunity, but often lacks depth. People are encouraged to pursue success, but not always guided on how to maintain a sense of self within that pursuit. They are taught how to achieve, but not necessarily how to understand what achievement means to them personally. And without that understanding, it becomes easy to follow a path that looks successful from the outside but feels empty on the inside. This brings us to a critical point in the story where awareness alone is no longer enough. Recognizing the pattern is important, but it does not automatically change how you interact with it. The next step is to begin developing a framework, a way of navigating the world that allows you to engage with opportunities without losing your sense of identity. Because the goal is not to withdraw from society, but to participate in it without becoming defined by its most superficial measures. So, the question becomes not whether you can escape this system, but how you move within it without letting it define you. Because completely stepping away is rarely realistic. We all need to earn, to participate, to build something in the world. The real challenge is learning how to engage with money, status, and opportunity without turning them into the foundation of your identity. That requires a shift, not in your external life at first, but in how you interpret value internally. One way to begin is by separating what is useful from what is meaningful. Money is useful. Recognition can be useful. Even presentation has its place in helping you navigate social environments. But usefulness does not equal worth. When those two ideas become confused, that is when the system starts to take control. You begin to treat yourself as something that must always perform, always produce, always justify its existence. And over time, that pressure erodes your ability to simply exist without evaluation. Another important step is developing an internal reference point. Most people rely heavily on external feedback to understand their value. They look at how others respond, how they are perceived, what they receive in return. But if that is your only reference, your sense of self will always be unstable. An internal reference point means knowing what matters to you independently of how it is received. It means having standards that are not constantly adjusted based on trends or expectations. This does not make you rigid, it makes you grounded. At the same time, it is important to understand that authenticity is not about rejecting all forms of strategy or adaptation. You can still present yourself well. You can still pursue opportunities. You can still make decisions that are practical and forward-thinking. The difference lies in intention. Are you shaping yourself purely to fit what is rewarded, or are you expressing something that already exists within you? That distinction may seem subtle, but it has a profound impact on how you experience your own life. You also have to accept that choosing authenticity often comes with trade-offs. You may not always be the most recognized or the fastest to succeed. You may miss out on certain advantages that come from fully playing the game. But in exchange, you gain something that is harder to measure and easier to overlook. You gain stability in who you are. You gain the ability to make decisions without constantly questioning your own worth. And over time, that stability becomes a form of strength that cannot be easily replaced. There is also a need to redefine success on your own terms. If success is only defined by external indicators, you will always be chasing something that moves. There will always be a higher level, a better version, a more impressive outcome. But if success includes alignment, clarity, and a sense of internal consistency, it becomes something you can actually experience, not just pursue. It becomes less about reaching a destination and more about how you move through the process. This framework is not perfect, and it does not eliminate all pressure or uncertainty. But it creates space to pause before making decisions, space to question motivations, space to reconnect with something that is not immediately visible, but deeply important. And in that space, you begin to reclaim parts of yourself that may have been shaped by external forces without your awareness. That is where the real shift happens, not in what you achieve, but in how you relate to yourself while achieving it. As the story moves toward its final reflection, it becomes clear that the issue was never just about a specific time period or a specific practice. It is about a recurring pattern in human behavior, one that adapts to different environments, but carries the same underlying logic. And once you see that pattern, the responsibility shifts. You are no longer just an observer. You are someone who has the ability to choose how much of that logic you allow into your own life, and how much of yourself you are willing to trade in return. At some point, every system reveals its final cost, not in theory, but in lived experience. It shows up quietly often, much later than expected, when the rewards have already been collected and the excitement has begun to fade. What remains is a question that is difficult to ignore. Was it worth it? Not in terms of money or recognition, but in terms of what had to be given up along the way. And for many people, that question arrives at a moment when it is no longer easy to change direction. There are lives that look successful from the outside, but feel strangely incomplete from within. People who have achieved everything they were told to pursue, yet still carry a sense of absence they cannot fully explain. That absence is often the result of years spent prioritizing external validation over internal alignment. It is not that they made the wrong choices in a simple sense. It is that those choices were made within a framework that never asked who they truly wanted to become. It only asked what they could gain. This is where the deeper consequence of self-commodification becomes clear. When you spend enough time presenting a version of yourself that is shaped by demand, you begin to lose connection with the version that exists without it. And when the demand disappears, or when you no longer have the energy to maintain the performance, there is a sense of emptiness that follows. Not because you have nothing, but because what you have is not rooted in something that feels fully yours. In earlier times, the consequences of this system were often visible in more obvious ways. Lives disrupted identities, fractured individuals left in positions where they no longer belonged anywhere. Today, the outcomes may look more stable on the surface, but the internal experience can be just as complex. People may have careers, relationships, and financial security, yet still feel disconnected from their own sense of purpose. The structure is intact, but the meaning within it feels uncertain. What makes this even more challenging is that modern society rarely encourages this kind of reflection. There is constant movement, constant distraction, constant pressure to keep going. Slowing down to question the direction you are moving in can feel uncomfortable, even counterproductive. But without that pause, it becomes very easy to continue on a path that no longer aligns with who you are becoming. And the longer you stay on that path, the harder it becomes to step away from it. This is why awareness alone is not enough. It has to be followed by intentional action, even if that action is small. It might be choosing to prioritize something that does not bring immediate reward, but feels meaningful. It might be setting boundaries that protect your time and energy, even if it means missing out on certain opportunities. It might be redefining what progress looks like for you, not based on comparison, but based on a sense of internal clarity. These choices may not always be visible to others, but they shape the direction of your life in significant ways. The truth is, you cannot completely remove yourself from a world that values performance and outcome. But you can decide how much of your identity you invest in that world. You can choose to engage with it as a participant rather than becoming fully defined by it. That distinction allows you to benefit from what the system offers without losing the parts of yourself that cannot be replaced. And over time, those parts become the foundation for a different kind of stability, one that is not dependent on constant validation. As we reach the end of this story, the focus shifts from the system itself to the individual within it. Because no matter how powerful the system is, it still operates through individual choices. Each decision, each adjustment, each compromise contributes to the larger pattern. But it also creates an opportunity to shift that pattern, even if only in a small way. And sometimes those small shifts are enough to change the trajectory of an entire life.